All right, everybody. Shall we get started then? We've got an agenda for us. Okay, again, discussion format, so questions are welcome at any point during that, and actually encourage, please interrupt and ask your questions away if anything's not clear. And today will be much more hands-on as well. We're going to get into some of the technology. Last time we sort of introduced the subject and it was a little bit presentation-y, but today I want to show some demos and walk you through some of the tech behind the scenes. We will press record. So the session will be recorded, so we can share that with people and keep that on our website, etc. So Mariana, would you mind? You've started? Awesome.
Yes, just kicked it off.
Oh, we started recording. Fantastic. Okay, and then welcome from myself, Paul Heaton, co-founder and CEO at cubesys, and then George is going to take over and do the vast majority of the talking and walk you through some of the tech in AVD. Have we got another slide with the upcoming sessions, George, or do I cover that off at the end? Remind me.
We covered that one off at the end.
Okay. Yeah. In which case, then I think it's time to get over to the tech and let's talk FSlogix and profiles and some of the magic that FSlogix provides. So for those of you that don't know, and I'm probably going to steal a bit of George's thunder, FSlogix was bought by Microsoft probably a little bit before AVD came out, probably about a year beforehand, and then integrated in a platform. And it's one of the key differentiators when we're moving VDI to the cloud. The ability to be able to virtualize the profiles in this manner has been really powerful and has really helped us in the VDI community to get better solutions to our end users. All right. Okay, with no further ado then, George, I'm going to hand over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. So for those of you that don't know me on the call, my name is George Zakowski. I'm one of the senior cloud consultants here at cubesys, and I've basically been across over 30, 40 plus projects that we've done here at cubesys involving AVD and all the various technologies. So let's jump straight into it. I'm just going to turn my camera off. This computer's slow. Cool. So we're just going to go through a quick introduction. We're going to go through FSlogix profiles, what they are, FSlogix application masking and how to use it, and then I'll go through some demos and show you how to set it up. So let's dive into it. So FSlogix. Containerization. Basically, like Paul mentioned, FSlogix is a containerization profile management solution that was purchased by Microsoft some time ago. It basically separates the user profile from the actual machine that they're logging into. So like capturing that in a virtual hard disk and then storing it on a storage account elsewhere, and then when a user logs into a VM, it just dynamically attaches to the virtual machine that you're logging into and all the user's data along with it. There are a couple of different options when installing FSlogix. So by default is the profile container stuff and the Office container containerization. You've got application masking as well, which is a separate component, and then you've got Java version control, which also is another separate component, but I won't be covering that one today. Just to give you a quick rundown, application masking is what you use to hide applications, and Java version control is what you use to control which version of Java launches with a particular application or a website. So you could get some more granular control around that. Cool. So profile containers. Like I said before, it's basically a technology that redirects the user's profile to a virtual hard disk sitting on a file server somewhere, right? The entire user profile is captured, and you can also exclude or include specific files. The technology itself, by default, excludes things like temporary files, but you can go in there and exclude, downloads, pictures, videos, whatever you want. It's fully customizable. It's used for non-persistent environments to basically roam the user's profile. So essentially what you do is you would only use this technology on non-persistent VDI environments or multi-session VDI environments. It works differently to a redirected folder or a Citrix profile because it basically containerizes the entire user profile rather than just redirecting the files themselves. As part of FSlogix profile containerization, there is also Cloud Cache, which basically writes data locally on the virtual machine, and then it copies it up to the profile on a SMB share or Azure storage or whatever the case is. But that's primarily used for slow connections or in a DR environment, in case you lose the storage for whatever reason. When using Cloud Cache, you basically get slight impact on sign in and sign out times. So just be mindful of that. There's also the Office container, and then that basically there is if you're using AVD, you basically don't need the Office container because you're already running AVD in the cloud, and typically with those environments, you want your session hosts or your servers to have direct access to the Office 365 cloud. The container is basically similar to Cloud Cache, but it only caches Office data such as OneDrive, OneNote, any sort of Office applications, that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, you don't need it for AVD. So how does it work? You can see in that diagram there, it basically separates the profile from the Windows operating system. So the container's roamed or redirected to a storage account somewhere. There's a Windows agent that needs to be installed on the operating system, and it's managed via registry or group policy. Very simple and easy to set up. When a user logs in, the service itself will check if there is a container that exists that houses the user's user profile. If it doesn't, it will create one. And you can basically see that happening in the background. You can check the SMB share where the profiles are meant to be stored. You can see it in Disk Manager if it's been mounted to the user's VM, or you can just go into the C user's profile. And I'll show you that a little bit later on in the demo. But basically, it writes directly to the share. So it's mounted to the virtual machine. It's not copied down locally or anything like that. It's a direct mount, so you need fast storage for it. And typically, Microsoft recommends about 50 IOPS for login and 10 IOPS for a steady state. So meaning when the user goes to log in for the first time, it roughly uses 50 IOPS per user to log in. And then once they've logged into the environment, a steady 10 IOPS is used, to do their work inside that environment. So that's for one single user, and then you need to do the math to basically calculate how much read-write IOPS you're going to need and things like that. Here is a typical deployment of, I guess, a storage account that's attached to a subset of desktops over here. So over on the right-hand side, we can see Azure NetApp files or Azure files are being used. Best practice is to create a different profile location for each session or host pool in this case. So this is a host pool that may be publishing your standard SOE, and all the profiles that users log into are stored on either a storage account, Azure NetApp files, or some sort of other file server. And then you've got a second host pool over here, which basically same thing, the profiles are directed to a different storage account. The reason why you'll do this and it's best practice is because you would prevent issues such as profile corruption. So if you had, for example, Windows 10 9.10.09 over here, and then you had 21H2 over here, and you're using the same profile for both, you might get corruption when logging in from a different host pool using the same profile and vice versa. You also want your storage to be close to the workload. So it obviously wants all those IOPS performance. You don't want to be using slow storage. You don't want to have your traffic routing on-prem and then coming back over to the storage account. When setting up this kind of stuff, you want to be using things like private endpoint that's got direct access to that storage account to be able to mount those volumes on demand. Couple of the different storage options here. So again, you've got Azure Files Premium. This gives you good IOPS, but it's a little bit more involved when managing a number of shares. So there are two flavors of Azure Files. You've got Standard and Premium. I wouldn't recommend Standard at all because it just doesn't give you as much IOPS as required. It's good for like POC environments and testing and things like that, but Premium is what gives you the IOPS that you need. And depending on how big you size your Azure File storage account, you will get more IOPS. So the bigger you go, the more IOPS you'll get. Azure NetApp Files is great because it uses, it's got sub-millisecond latency and it allows for, you can use one huge volume to cater for all your profiles and provides cross-region replication and that kind of stuff and snapshots and whatnot. So if you're looking to deploy this in a production environment, over 1,000 concurrent users, that kind of stuff, Azure NetApp Files is the way to go. And then you've also just got a simple file service. You can use like a DFS share or something, housed in Azure, like a VM running, SMB shares or whatnot. You can do that as well, but it's recommended to store profiles on Azure Storage because you can scale up and you can scale down as needed. So if you find that, you're onboarding a lot of users or go into another lockdown or something like that, you can scale up that environment and get more IOPS as you scale up. For all of these options here, though, you need to have the storage accounts domain joined to your Active Directory so that you can apply NTFS permissions on the profile share. So again, all of that stuff still is relevant in this cloud environment. So when a user logs in, the FSlogix registry or ADMX files will basically say, this is where your profile is going to live. The user logs in. They would need, creator owner access on that file, which comes into this slide here. So they would need creator owner access to that sort of top level file. And then you've got, your admins that have got access to everything. And then your actual users themselves have got permissions inside their folder to create the actual VHD file itself. If you're using Azure files, you need to grant another role inside Azure. It's basically the SMB share contributor role and SMB share elevated contributor roles to basically manage those files inside Azure if you want to go down that path as well. I'll come across that in the demo a little bit later just to show you how that works. Setup of FSlogix is really simple. Like I said earlier, there's 4 components to it. 2 of them are already included as part of the FSlogix default installation. The other 2, like app masking and the Java stuff, is a separate installer, but it's all housed inside the one package they download from Microsoft. So it's just the next installation. Really, really simple. It's done, finish, reboot the machine, happy days. As part of that installer, they include 2 ADMX files that you import into your group policy. Here's an example of a setup that I've got in my lab environment at the moment. So when you import these ADMX files, they're computer config files. It comes under administrative templates, FSlogix, and then profile containers. Here you can see some of the settings that I've set up. So basically, profile type is you've got standard, you've got read write, you've got multi-session, that kind of stuff. Again, Microsoft recommends separating out each of your host pools and your profiles, like mapping them one-to-one. Don't be sharing profiles across different host pools. Enabled is basically enabling the service. VHD location is specifying where you want those files to be housed. Dynamic VHD X allocation basically says if you're using a VHD X type for your profile, it will grow as needed, right? So users don't hit a hard limit. The default, I think, is 30 gigabytes. So if someone's got more than 30 gigabytes worth of stuff, you get some weird stuff going on in their profile. They might not be able to log in. It's slow, that kind of thing. So this will allow that profile to grow. Delete local profile when FSlogix profile should apply basically says when a user logs in, if they've got a FSlogix profile, then wipe away the local profile that's created by Windows when they log off, so to keep that VM clean. Size in megabytes is obviously there if you want to have if you know that your users' profiles are roughly 50 gig in size, so more than the default 30 gig, you can crank that up there as well. So there's some of the different options that you've got. When you do install the agent, typically you do it on your gold image. And then from there, you've also got a local group that it creates on the gold image and all of the machines that are built thereafter. Those groups are FSlogix profile exclude list, include list, office directory, that kind of stuff. If you want to exclude, for example, administrative users or like domain admins or something like that from getting a profile, you can do it here. You can apply that via group policy or script or hard set it in the image, whatever you like. But you want to do this for your administrative users so that if there is ever a problem with FSlogix that's preventing you from logging in, this is where you would go in and exclude those AD groups or users or whatever the case is to bypass that profile so that you can actually get onto the machine and do some troubleshooting. The FSlogix application itself provides some tools here. So it's got an interface where you can go in and configure this kind of stuff that I just showed you in group policy. But if you want to get more advanced and, convert profiles and copy profiles, things like that, you can do it via command line here. So for example, copy profile will copy an existing profile on a local machine into a virtual hard disk. So if you wanted to do any sort of migrations from, you know, Citrix to FSlogix or AVD, you would use something like this to grab those profiles and convert them. You've got an option there to delete a redirect. So if for whatever reason a user's logged out, but their profile is locked by the machine and you don't want to reboot that machine because there are other users logged into that machine that are using it, you can hit the delete redirect option. It'll sort of just cancel or remove that sort of hard lock on that profile. You've also got a redirections XML that you can configure. So by default, the temporary folder location and the IE cache folder location are excluded from roaming with a FSlogix profile. If you had any other stuff that you wanted to exclude or not roam, or maybe even you wanted to roam a specific thing, there's a redirections XML file that you can create as sort of like a baseline for any users logging in, or you can do it on a user per user basis if you want to go down to that level. The file's not pre-created, so you need to create it first, but basically it's an XML file where you jump in there and say, you know, I want to include this file, I want to exclude this file, that kind of thing. So real easy to use. There's also additional scripts that you can create, find online. There's heaps of them available. There are ones there to decrease the virtual hard disk size. So if you find that, you know, you've over provisioned VHD files, you can shrink them using scripts. And there's also other scripts where you can say, hey, what happens when a user leaves the organization? You know, their profile folder is going to sit on the storage account for, you know, a couple of months before someone figures out that, you know, it's no longer required. So there are scripts that you can run that'll basically detect the last login timestamp, that kind of stuff. And, you know, if it's more than 6 months or whatever the case is, go ahead and delete it just to keep things neat and tidy. Moving on to FSlogix app masking. So you basically use app masking to hide applications from users based on a couple of rules that you set up. So you can create new rule sets, you can edit an existing rule set, you can manage the user and group assignments, and you can test rules, right? The hiding rule hides a specified item from the user. So you can hide a particular application, a folder, whatever the case is. You've got a redirect rule that can redirect certain things to something else if you wanted to do that. There's also an app container rule, which redirects the specified content into a virtual hard disk if you want to go down that route. And then finally, there's a value, like a registry value rule that can assign specific registry items when launching an application. This is what the FSlogix application masking rule editor looks like. Again, you can jump in, assign a hiding rule. You can edit the rules, you can test it. You can have multiple applications in the same rule set. So you can hide things like, I don't know, VLC, PuTTY, any sort of system tools like that you can put into one rule set and say, you know, this rule is going to hide these applications based on this particular user or this particular Active Directory group or network location, IP address, that kind of thing. So it's fully customizable and you can get really granular with it. When creating these kind of rule sets, the rules are processed top down. So similar to like firewall rules. So whatever rule matches at the top will apply and then it goes down the list. When creating the rule sets though, it actually spits out a .frx or something like that extension file. Those need to be copied to each of your servers or your session hosts in this particular folder here. So C, program files, FSlogix, apps, rules. It's not until the rule sets themselves are copied to this folder set that the application is actually hidden. So it's not going to take effect until that happens. And typically best practice is you can create these rule sets on a gold image. You can create them on a temp VM. Doesn't really matter because the agent has to be on the gold image anyway to do this. You would go ahead, create all of your rule sets, copy them to like a SMB share somewhere, NetLogon share, whatever the case is, and just have like a GPO to copy them across, you know, as the VMs are built and that kind of thing. Licensing. So FSlogix is pretty much free. If you have any of these licenses, which no doubt you probably already have. So there's no additional cost or anything like that. Microsoft bought it a few years back, so it's fully licensed. Everybody can use it. And this includes all of the stuff. So the profile management, the Office container, application masking, and then finally the Java control. Does anyone have any questions on that before I jump into a demo? Awesome. Jump in. Just going to log into my Azure environment here. I'm using a storage account, Azure File Standard. Standard because it's just a little lab environment, but typically you would use premium storage because you get the added benefit of all the IOPS and all that performance. With this particular SKU, if I jump into file shares, pretty sure it's, yeah. So the maximum IOPS I can get in this particular environment is 1,000. So that would cover, I think, 2 users. So yeah, depending on how big your environment is, I mean, you wouldn't use standard, you'd get premium or Azure NetApp files to do this kind of stuff. But basically what happens is you would create a Azure file share. That file share itself needs to be domain joined. So if I just go back one, we can see the Active Directory is configured. When domain joining a storage account itself, you need to use, like with Azure Files, you need to use the Azure Files hybrid PowerShell script. It's, if you just Google storage account domain join, there's a Microsoft script that you can run. You basically import it, you run it, it will domain join this storage account, and then it'll come up as a computer object in your Active Directory. If I jump inside the container itself, here are all of the user profiles that have logged into my environment and that the FSlogix agent has automatically created a folder for. So if I jump into Tony Stark, we can see that there's a VHDX file. It's 15 gig. That's the user's actual profile itself. Just going to log in now and show you the disk being attached. So you can see there it said waiting for FSlogix profile service to attach. And it's really quick. It's like as if the profile is installed locally on this machine. The VM itself that I'm using though is pretty small, so it might be a bit sluggish inside the environment, but the profile is basically attached. So how do we check that? A couple of different ways. First way is you can jump into the C drive, users, and we can see here that there's a local Tony Stark profile and then an actual Tony Stark profile. So I can tell straight away that FSlogix has worked because it's got that local profile. So this local stuff here is all that temp data, anything that's sort of not going to be roamed across the environment when I log out. So this will be like, you know, any credentials, any stuff that I don't want to come across. Everything else is housed inside the profile, and it's like a normal profile, as if it was locally stored on this computer here. The other way that you can check that it's working is if you go into disk management. Scroll down the bottom here, we can see that there's a 30 gigabyte profile that's been attached to this machine, and that's basically my profile there. Ignore these two other ones, they're app attached. That's a different topic, and I'll cover that a little bit later on, but that's where my profile's been attached. Finally, you can check it inside your logs. FSlogix operational. Ignore a lot of these errors because this is my test environment. But basically, we can see their profile load status Tony Stark. It's mounted the profile there. There is also one other final way that you can check it, only because I've got this option turned on. So this is me experimenting with things. But if I jump in here, I've got a read-write profile. That's because I've turned on the the concurrent read-write profile option inside group policy to do that. If I didn't have that, this timestamp will just be whatever the time is that I logged in. So it'd be 11:27. We see that single profile's there. If I wanted to do anything with this profile, jump in, modify it, maybe I want to go in there and change a redirections folder or something like that. The tools that I mentioned earlier in the presentation can be found at C, Program Files, FSlogix, Apps, And we've got a bunch of stuff here. So you've got the command line tools that were FRX. So you could just open PowerShell or command and do a FRX.exe question mark, and it'll give you all of those tools that I mentioned before. You've also got a configuration tool here as well that I can come in here and open a user's profile. So I can jump in and find somebody, let's say James Bond, come in there, load the profile, and I can say, you know, I want to exclude contacts, downloads, whatever, exclude, you know, any other folders, sorry, exclude any other folders here, include any folders, that kind of stuff, hit save, and that'll create me that redirections file. Or I can go ahead and create one manually, and Microsoft's got documentation on that. And you would basically just put that, you know, you can leave it sort of at the top level of your storage. And then any users that go in, you'd have a GPO that says, you know, when a new user logs in, look at the redirections XML file and apply those permissions to any new users logging in. So that's how you set that up. Any questions on FSlogix profiles before I move on to app masking? Cool. All right, app masking. So just go to the installer real quick. So just to show you guys, when you download the FSlogix installer, you've got the two ADMX files there that you can copy to your Group Policy Central store so that they're available in GPO. You can edit it that way, or you can do registry if you like. Actually, I might just show you that real quickly if we go into Reg Edit. These are the options that I've got set turned on. So basically VHD locations is that storage account that I showed you earlier. It's a VHDX, and then, you know, delete local profile when VHD should apply, concurrent sessions, that kind of stuff. I've set all of that up. With the FSlogix agent, so I mentioned the profile stuff and the Office stuff is contained in this executable here. The application rule editor or app masking is this installer here, and then you've got the Java one at the top there. So I've already installed this app's rule editor, and I've got it here on the desktop. I've just got a shortcut to it. So I'll show you how to hide a particular application. So we go new, say, I don't know, hide, what have we got? Putty. We can choose from a list of applications. So typically you would just select whatever you want. So like, let's just go Firefox, you hit the scan button. Some applications like Putty, when you click on it, there is no scan button available, probably because the shortcut itself doesn't, it's pointing to a different location that this doesn't like. So what you can do, you can come into your program files folder, find where Putty is actually installed, select that folder, and then hit scan. And then this is going to go ahead and check all of the executables, all the shortcuts, all the registry, everything that's associated with Putty. So if you have a look here, we're hiding the rule. We're doing a directory hide. We're hiding the local machine, the uninstall keys. We're hiding, you know, this registry key, all of this stuff, any shortcuts, anything like that, we're going to hide it. Come in here, hit the assignments. Now I mentioned earlier that this was top down. So I could come in here and say, I want to hide this from WVD users, for example, right? Do I have that group? WVD. Ugh. Main users. DVD. That's great. I don't have many groups. But if I had a group, I'd put a group in there and hide it from that particular group. But just for the sake of this demo, I'm going to hide this for everybody, right? So everybody that logs into this environment is not going to see Putty. So this is where you set the options, yes or no. I'm going to say yes, it's going to apply. Hit OK. And then we've already saved it. So there are the two files that it generates on the desktop. I can then close this. And as I mentioned earlier, you need to copy that or have something copy that to the FSlogix apps rules directory. Now you'll see Putty just here on the desktop. Once I cut these or copy them and paste them into this directory, Putty will disappear in a second. There it is, it's gone. So I'm obviously applying this to everybody, but had I had, you know, AD groups and things like that, I can say, you know, admins can see Putty or network administrators can see Putty, everyone else can't. The good thing about this is as soon as I delete this rule set, Putty will come back. There it is there. So Depending on where I have it, how many rules and things like that I've set up, you can get real granular with this. So you can install every single application under the sun on your gold image, have it present to your users as a desktop, and then depending on their access, maybe their HR people, they need access to finance, to SAP, the finance people, they need access to SAP, that kind of stuff. You can hide it from all other users except for people that are member of the SAP Active Directory group, that kind of thing. So it really helps with image management and maintenance. Even when that rule is created, I'll just go back real quick. I'll create another one. I'll do hide VLC desktop. Scan. Okay. That gives me the, oh, I didn't edit the rule set. Open. Then I'm going to say hide this for everybody. Apply. As soon as I cut this, VLC will disappear from the desktop. VLC also disappears from program files. Video LAN, completely empty, right? So no user will see it. It's going to show in the start menu right now because I haven't logged off and logged back in yet. But if I try and click it, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't launch it. It can't find it. So it's not until I log off and log back in that it'll actually disappear from the start menu. There might be an update for that. I'm running an older version of FSlogix on this, but that's typically what happens. And again, to remove that rule set, go back into FSlogix, apps rules, and just delete it from there. VLC will come back. The other thing that you can do with this is if you run it as an administrator from the get-go, and we go new rule set, whatever, doesn't matter. Just say Google Chrome. Let's do Chrome. Chrome installed. And that. And I change this to apply to everybody. I can hit this button here and say, apply these rules to the system. Chrome goes away instantly. Hit it again, it'll come back. So that's how you can test your rule sets. The other thing as well is I mentioned you could do hiding rules, redirection rules, VHD rules, registry rules, that kind of stuff. You can apply them here as well inside the application. And then the last thing is you can also apply another hiding rule for a file directory or whatever the case is based on a particular application. So if you had SAP, you had an additional module with SAP or something that you wanted to hide when users log in, so you don't have to manage multiple rules. You can have application 1 here, application 2, application 3, and just sort of compile it into one rule set to then apply your permissions based on that. Any questions around any of this? Oh, awesome. That's pretty much all that we had for today's session. If there's anything else that you wanted to, I guess, experiment with or ask questions or test anything like that, feel free to reach out to me.
So George, maybe a quick question for me on that app masking. How are you seeing that being applied in the field? Can you think of what's the most sort of common use case you see?
Yeah, so it really depends on how granular you want to get with your gold images, right? So these applications themselves or these rule sets, we typically see people deploying them on the gold image. They'd have a really fat gold image. That way they just have one desktop image that they need to update once a month. They would apply rule sets based on their gold image to hide applications from certain users, and then that way they can publish one single host pull out to those users. Another way that people are hiding it is if you have an application that is licensed to, say, a particular user. That's another good example that you can do. So, for example, I don't know, Adobe Acrobat Pro, for example. You can use a rule set to hide that from everybody else except the users that are licensed for that particular application. That way you don't have to spin up a separate host pool and then have that deployed to your other users, because for every host pool, every VM that you spin up, it's going to cost you more in Azure, right? So if you can consolidate all of that stuff into a single image, you're getting away with costs by doing that.
It's great for managing those licensing requirements, where we can put people into a security group that have the license, and it's nice and easy for us to manage, and it just appears for them, which is great. And then managing that image, like you say, that I suppose in VDI we're always trying to put as many apps as is sensible onto the image, not too many, because it makes it hard to manage, but a sensible amount on there, so that we can get some good flexibility of use cases across the user base, right?
Yeah.
Different functions within the business, right? Yeah. Minimize the number of images, all that type of thing.
Yeah. A lot of people are actually using this as well to, hide things like group policy manager, Active Directory, that kind of thing. So if they have, the RSAT tools installed on the image, they don't want to spin up additional hosts, that kind of thing, they just apply that to their IT, IT groups to give them access to that. Another customer that I've got at the moment uses some firewalls, right? They have the Checkpoint Firewalls agent installed on the image itself, and they only want networking guys to have access to that. So they use a lot of these rules just to hide it from those particular users. Typically, I mean, those kind of applications need an additional login to get in anyway, right? And it's like SSL or something like that. But if they don't have access, there's really no need. I mean, you don't have to use the rules editor for every single application. I think that's a little bit overkill, because, even if a user doesn't have access to it, they launch it, it's going to throw them an error, or it's going to ask for an additional login. But things that are, that you genuinely want to hide from users, you'd only create those rule sets based on that. And if you're publishing remote applications from a session host, then you don't typically need to use the rule sets, unless your users are really smart. They want to go in, file open, and then browse to the C directory and launch another app, that kind of thing. Yes, you can use it in that instance, but generally speaking, you probably don't need to go down that route.
Yeah. So really powerful and useful, but use it sparingly, so that we don't get too much operational overhead, right?
100%. Yeah, you don't want to have 50,000 rules and then have to manage each and every one of them. And it's a lot harder for troubleshooting, right? I mean, if you can just get away with one or two rule sets, like group your applications together and have one or two rule sets for those apps, even better, right?
Yeah. That sounds like sensible advice then. But when most of it, once you've set it up the first time, a lot of the management then is really just put people in and out of security groups, right?
Pretty much. Yep, yeah. Pretty much. So if I can get to the start menu on this thing, I'll just go and show you guys real quick some more options that you've got with the registry side of it. Sorry, the group policy side of it. My domain controller here. So here are some of the options that we've got, or some of the stuff that I typically set up, just to make it easier. So profile containers, as I mentioned before, I set all of this up. If you jump into each one, it's like any other group policy, right? It tells you what you can and can't do, or what it's related to. But in container and directory naming, I've got a couple of options set here as well. So one is swap directory name components. This will basically put the user's SAM account name in front of their SID, because by default it gives you a long SID when it names profiles. If I jump in here, it's just easier to find your users this way. And again, I've lost the taskbar. And then the other one there is virtual disk type. I typically set this to VHDX, because VHDX are the ones that can dynamically expand as the profile grows. So that way you don't get users that get locked out of sessions. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can apply here as well. If you look at it going down that cloud cache option, you've got some stuff here that you can apply. You've also got some advanced stuff, retry counts, that kind of thing, prevent login with failures, right? So if you're...
We haven't done a lot of that, but the that cloud cache piece, is that around the fact that FSlogix can be used on-prem?
Yes. Yeah,
So
yeah,
once
100%.
a lot of people don't realize that when you're licensed for FSlogix via AVD, using AVD, you can actually take FSlogix and use it on premises, and then the two sync, don't they, George? Although we don't have a lot of clients doing that, really.
Yeah, yeah. Look, the cloud cache is primarily for like slow connections to your storage account, or if you have like a really bad WAN interface or something like that. That's when you'd use that, because it actually caches a profile locally. It does all the writes locally, and then it syncs them in the background to the actual storage account. Yeah, that's what that's used for. I haven't really come across anybody that's had a need for that. You can use that sort of in like a DR environment, right? So if you log in, so you're only running in Australia East, the entire region goes down for whatever reason. You've still got a local cache there, but as soon as you log off, I mean, it's gone. So you want to look at things like GRS for your storage accounts, or you definitely want to start looking into the Azure NetApp files that's got cross-region replication, snapshot policies, that kind of stuff.
Probably a good segue, mate, because that's one of the future sessions, right? We're going to go into NetApp, Azure NetApp files in more detail and all that storage options.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just bring up the next sessions that are coming up.
Oh, okay.
So
It's the next one. There we are.
Yeah, there you go. So the next one is storage best practices and Azure NetApp files. So we've got a couple of guest speakers from Azure NetApp files that are going to come along. Happy to answer any questions. So if you have anything technical around that, come along, ask them. They'll be on the call to answer those questions. I'll probably go through a demo on that one on how to get started with Azure NetApp files and set it up and do the whole domain join stuff. Because again, you still need to domain join that storage account. And I can probably go through a couple of cross-region stuff. So how to set that up, you basically need two storage accounts or two NetApp files accounts in two different regions. Depending on how much time I get, I might be able to run through that as well and show you a little bit of that stuff.
Sounds good. Good. Awesome. Well, I think, have we got any more questions from the floor there? Anybody want to ask more questions? No, silence is golden. Well, in that case, thank you everybody for attending session number 2 on FSlogix and profiles. Hopefully you learned lots along the way there. And thank you, George, again for a great session. And we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time in the next one.
Yep.
In between time, guys, please reach out, ask questions, or prompt us for content that you might like to see. We've got the series sort of published now, but we can always adapt that as we go forward. So love to hear from you. And the whole plan was to make sure we're answering questions for you guys. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.